I thought
I'm
Christmas
asking
was
you again,
supposed to
did
bring
you pay
peace.
for everything in
I
these
never
bags?
imagined
Where
it
is
would
the receipt?
end with me standing in the cold, shaking. And I never imagined a police officer would be the one to break me. My name is Margaret Hill. I am a mother before anything else. That is how I have lived my whole life. Christmas had ended 2 days earlier. The decorations were still up. The lights were still hanging on the porch, blinking softly like they were tired. The tree was still in the living room, needles slowly falling to the floor. I had not taken anything down yet. I never rush Christmas away. It reminds me of when my son was still home. That morning was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy in your chest. I woke up early, as usual, made myself some tea, stood by the kitchen window, and watched the street. The neighborhood looked normal. Clean sidewalks, parked cars, children's bikes left outside even though it was winter. I had lived on that street for almost 15 years. Paid my taxes. Never caused trouble. Never even raised my voice at anyone. I was invisible. And I was fine with that. Around 9 a.m., I decided to go out. Just a short walk. I needed groceries. Milk. Bread. Eggs. I put on my coat, wrapped a scarf around my neck, slipped my gloves on slowly because my fingers hurt in the cold. Before leaving, I looked at a framed photo on the hallway table. My son, in uniform. People never guessed what he did. I never told them. I didn't need to. I locked the door behind me and walked down the porch steps. That's when I saw the police car. It was parked a little down the street. Engine running. Lights off. I didn't think much of it at first. Police cars came through sometimes. Routine patrols. I walked past my neighbor's house. Then another. I heard a door open behind me. Heavy footsteps. Ma'am. I stopped. Turned around slowly. A police officer was walking toward me. Tall. Broad shoulders. His face was tight. Not angry, exactly. More like annoyed. Yes. I said. He looked me up and down. Slow. Not subtle. What do you think you're doing? He asked. I blinked. I'm going to the store. He frowned. Do you live around here? I felt something small shift inside me. A familiar feeling. One I hated. Yes, I said. I live right there. I pointed to my house. He didn't look. He crossed his arms. You got ID? The question hit harder than it should have. Not because of the words, but because of the way he said them. Why? I asked. Because I'm asking, he said. Sharp. Flat. I hesitated. Then reached into my purse. My hands were already cold. Now they were shaking. I handed him my ID. He stared at it for a long moment. Then, at me. You sure this is you? He said. I swallowed. Yes. He stepped closer. Too close. We've had complaints, he said. Complaints. I repeated. Suspicious people walking around, he said. After the holidays. Burglaries go up. I looked around. The street was empty. I've lived here for years, I said quietly. He smiled. But it wasn't kind. That doesn't mean anything, he said. He handed my ID back like it was dirty. You shouldn't be wandering around, he said. People get nervous. Something inside me tightened. I'm not wandering, I said. I'm walking to the store. It's morning. He laughed under his breath. Right, he said. I felt small. Smaller than I had in years. I'd like to go, I said. He stepped sideways, blocking my path. Hold on, he said. Got something in that bag? It's my purse, I said. Open it. I stared at him. My heart was pounding now. I don't consent to. Open it, he snapped. I looked around again. No one was watching. No one was coming. I opened my purse with slow fingers. He leaned forward, looked inside. Wallet, keys, a small notebook, a folded Christmas card. He scoffed. You people always act like victims, he said. The words landed hard. I'm not acting, I said softly. I just want to go buy groceries. He straightened up. You need to watch your tone, he said. My chest hurt. Not physically, but close. I haven't done anything wrong, I said. He stepped closer again. You arguing with a police officer? He asked. No, I said quickly. I'm explaining. He shook his head. You fit a description, he said. What description? I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached out and grabbed my arm. Not hard, but firm enough. I gasped. Please don't touch me, I said. He tightened his grip. Stop resisting, he said. I'm not resisting, I said. My voice was shaking now. A neighbor's curtain moved slightly, then went still. He pulled me a step closer to the car. Let go of me, I said. Calm down, he said loudly. Like I was the problem. I felt tears in my eyes. Anger, fear, shame, all mixed together. I am a mother, I said without thinking. I live here. I have rights. He laughed again. Everyone's got a story, he said. Then he pushed me back, slightly. Enough to make me stumble. I caught myself on the curb. Pain shot up my ankle. That's enough, he said. Get home. And don't cause trouble. I stood there, my heart racing, my hands numb. He turned and walked away, got into his car, drove off slowly, just like that. I stood on the sidewalk for a long time. Cars passed. No one stopped. I felt humiliated, exposed, like my dignity had been stripped in front of an empty street. When I finally turned back toward my house, my legs felt weak. Each step felt heavier than the last. When I reached my porch, I noticed something I hadn't before. The Christmas lights were still on, blinking, bright against the gray sky. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, closed it behind me, locked it. Then I leaned against it and slid down to the floor. That's when my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I wiped my face and pulled it out. One missed call, one message. From my son. Mom, I landed early. I'm closer than expected. I'll see you soon. I stared at the screen. My hands stopped shaking. I didn't know it yet, but that officer had made a mistake. A very big one. When I finally stood up from the floor, my body felt older than it was. My ankle throbbed where I had stumbled against the curb, and my arm ached where his fingers had wrapped around it. But worse than the physical pain was the feeling sitting heavy in my chest. It was the kind of pain you cannot point to, the kind that stays quiet but deep. I took off my coat slowly and hung it by the door. My hands were still trembling, even though I kept telling myself I was safe now. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. The glass rattled slightly against my teeth when I took a sip. I set it down and waited for my breathing to slow. I had been treated unfairly before in life. I was not naive. But this was different. This was someone with power. Someone with a badge and a gun. Someone who could decide, in a single moment, who mattered and who did not. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the wall. The clock ticked loudly. Every sound felt sharper than usual. I replayed the moment over and over in my mind. The way he looked at me. The way his voice changed when he spoke to me. The way he grabbed my arm like I was an object, not a person. I kept asking myself the same question. What if I had said one wrong word? What if I had pulled my arm away faster? What if there had been no one else on the street at all? My phone buzzed again on the table, making me flinch. I picked it up quickly, half afraid and half relieved. It was my son again. Mom, are you okay? The message read. You didn't answer my call. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. I didn't want to worry him. I had spent years doing the opposite, protecting him from my fears, letting him focus on his life, his career, his responsibilities. I'm fine, I typed. Just resting. Travel safe. The 3 dots appeared almost immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. I knew that pattern well. It meant he was thinking carefully. I'll be there in a few hours, he finally wrote. Please don't go out. I want to see you. I put the phone down and closed my eyes. A few hours felt like a lifetime and a blessing at the same time. I tried to distract myself. I turned on the television but couldn't focus on anything. The voices felt too loud, too cheerful. I turned it off and walked into the living room. The Christmas tree stood there, still decorated, still proud. I reached out and touched one of the ornaments my son had made as a child. A small wooden star with uneven edges. Memories rushed in without warning. Him running through the house in socks. Him asking 1,000 questions. Him standing taller every year, slowly becoming someone the world would notice. I had raised him alone. His father had left when he was young. It had not been easy, but I had done my best. I had taught him respect, discipline, kindness. I had taught him to stand up for himself, but never to look down on others. I wondered what he would say if he knew what had happened that morning. The thought made my chest tighten again. Around noon, there was a knock at the door. My heart jumped into my throat. For a brief, irrational moment, I thought it might be the officer again. I stood very still and listened. Another knock followed, gentler this time. "Margaret? It's Linda." Relief washed over me. I opened the door to see my neighbor standing there, holding a small paper bag. "I saw what happened earlier," she said quietly. "I just wanted to check on you." I stepped aside and let her in. Linda was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes. We had exchanged polite conversations over the years, but we were not close. Still, her presence felt grounding. "I'm okay," I said, though my voice betrayed me. She placed the bag on the table. "I brought you some soup. You looked shaken." I nodded and thanked her. We sat at the table together. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "That officer was out of line," she said finally. I wanted to say something, but I froze. I looked at her and saw guilt written across her face. I understood it. Fear has a way of silencing people. "It's okay," I said. "I understand." She shook her head. "It's not okay. You didn't deserve that." Hearing someone else say it made my eyes sting. I looked down at my hands and nodded. "He's been stopping people more lately," she continued. "Especially after the holidays. Like he's looking for trouble." That sentence stayed with me long after she left. After Linda went home, I locked the door again and sat quietly. The afternoon light shifted slowly across the room. I kept checking my phone, counting the minutes. Every car that passed outside made me tense. I thought about reporting what had happened. I thought about calling the police station. But the idea filled me with dread. Who would believe me? Who would listen? What if it only made things worse? By the time the sun began to set, my emotions felt raw. I had changed into more comfortable clothes, but my body still felt stiff. I made myself eat a few spoonfuls of the soup Linda had brought, though I had no appetite. Then I heard it, a car pulling into the driveway. I stood up slowly and walked to the window. My heart started pounding again, but this time for a different reason. I saw him step out of the car, taller than I remembered, broader shoulders, his posture straight, controlled, alert even in a quiet driveway. My son was home. I opened the door before he could knock. He turned toward me, and the moment our eyes met, his expression changed. He dropped his bag and crossed the distance in 2 steps, pulling me into a firm embrace. "Mom," he said softly. "What happened?" I hadn't planned to tell him. I had told myself I would wait, that I would choose my words carefully. But the way he held me, steady and protective, broke something open inside me. I pulled back slightly and looked up at him. "Come inside," I said. "We need to talk." As the door closed behind us, I knew one thing for certain. The quiet humiliation of that morning was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning. When we sat down in the living room, the house felt smaller, somehow, like the walls were listening. My son placed his bag by the door, but stayed standing for a moment, scanning the room the way he always did when he entered a space. It wasn't obvious to most people, but I noticed it because I was his mother. Years of training had shaped the way he moved, the way he looked at the world. Calm on the surface, alert underneath. "Sit," I said gently, pointing to the couch. He sat, but his body stayed tense. "Mom," he said, "you're shaking." I hadn't realized I was. I folded my hands together and tried to still them. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The Christmas lights reflected faintly in the window, blinking slowly, like they were counting time. "I don't want you to be angry," I said finally. That caught his attention. His brow tightened slightly. "Angry at who?" I took a deep breath. My chest felt tight, like I had been holding this in all day. This morning, I went out to buy groceries. Just a normal walk. I told him everything. Not dramatically. Not emotionally. Just the facts, the way I had learned to tell hard stories over the years. I described the police car, the way the officer spoke to me, the questions, the grip on my arm, the push, the humiliation of standing there while no one intervened. As I spoke, I watched my son's face change, not in the way people expect when they imagine anger. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't clench his fists. His expression simply became still. Too still. "That officer touched you?" he asked quietly. "Yes," I said. "Not badly. But enough." He nodded once, slowly. "Did you get his name?" "No," I said. I was too shaken. I just wanted to come home. He leaned back slightly and exhaled through his nose. "Did anyone see it?" "Linda from next door," I said. "She came by later." He nodded again. "Okay." There was a pause. Then he looked at me directly. "Mom, I need you to understand something. What you described isn't just disrespectful. It's a violation." I felt my throat tighten. "I know. I just didn't want trouble." His eyes softened for a moment. "You didn't cause trouble. He did." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street. The same street that had felt so hostile to me just hours earlier now looked calm, almost innocent. "I've seen this before," he said quietly. "Different places. Same behavior." I watched him, suddenly seeing not just my son, but the man he had become. The responsibility he carried. The weight of it. "I don't want you to do anything," I said quickly. "Please. I don't want this to become something bigger." He turned to face me. "Mom, with respect it already is." I shook my head. "I just want peace. And I want justice," he replied. "Those two things shouldn't cancel each other out." He sat back down across from me, leaning forward slightly. "I'm not here as an admiral right now. I'm here as your son. But that doesn't mean I can ignore this." I flinched slightly at the word admiral, even though I knew it was true. He rarely mentioned his rank at home. To me, he was still the boy who used to leave his shoes in the hallway. "I don't want people to treat me differently because of you," I said. "They already did," he said gently. "Just not in the right way." There was a knock at the door again, sudden and sharp. My heart leapt. I looked at my son, and he immediately stood, positioning himself slightly in front of me. "I'll handle it," he said calmly. He opened the door. Two officers stood on the porch. One was the same man from that morning. My breath caught in my chest. The officer's eyes flicked past my son and landed on me. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He hadn't expected this. "Good evening," the other officer said. "We received a call about a possible incident earlier today." I felt my son tense, just slightly. "Who made the call?" he asked. "Concerned neighbor," the officer replied. "Linda." The first officer cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said, addressing me, "I was just doing my job this morning." My son stepped aside, just enough so I was fully visible. "That's not how it sounded," he said evenly. The officer looked at him more closely now. His eyes lingered on my son's posture, his bearing. "And you are?" the officer asked. "My name is Daniel Hill," my son replied. "I'm her son." The officer nodded. "All right. We just need to ask a few questions." My son didn't move. "Before you do," he said calmly, "I'd like to know under what authority you're here." The second officer shifted slightly. "Sir, we're just following up." "I understand," my son said. "But you don't enter a home without cause." There was a brief, tense silence. The first officer's tone changed. "Ma'am, did I harm you today?" I swallowed. My son looked at me, not pressuring, just present. "You grabbed my arm," I said. "And you pushed me." "That's not how I remember it," he said. "I do," I replied quietly. The second officer glanced between us. "Ma'am, would you like to file a report?" The words hung in the air. I looked at my son. He nodded once, slowly. "Yes," I said. "I would." The first officer's face hardened. "All right," the second officer said. "We'll need statements." My son spoke again. "Before we continue," he said, "I'd like this interaction documented properly." The officer frowned. And why is that? My son reached into his jacket and pulled out his ID. He didn't flash it dramatically. He simply held it out, calm and steady. The officer's eyes dropped to the card, then widened. His posture changed instantly. "Yes, sir," he said quickly. The first officer leaned in to see the ID. His face drained of color. I didn't look at the card. I didn't need to. I already knew what it said. What I didn't know yet was how far this would go, or how many people would suddenly start listening. But as I watched the officer who had humiliated me that morning stand stiff and silent in my doorway, I realized something important. For the first time that day, I wasn't invisible anymore. The air in the room felt heavier after my son showed his identification. It was as if an invisible line had been drawn across the floor, separating what had been from what was about to happen. The officer's posture changed almost immediately. Their voices became lower, more careful. The confidence that had filled the doorway moments earlier faded into something cautious and controlled. "I didn't realize," the second officer said, clearing his throat. "Sir." My son nodded once. "That's fine," he replied. "Let's focus on my mother." The first officer avoided eye contact with me now. The same man who had stood over me in the cold that morning suddenly seemed unsure of where to place his hands. They hovered near his belt, then dropped to his sides. "We can step inside," the second officer asked. I hesitated. My son glanced at me and waited. I nodded slowly. "All right," I said, "but just in the living room." They stepped in carefully, as if the house itself demanded respect. The door closed behind them, and the sound felt final, like a chapter ending. We sat down again, this time with the officers across from us. The room looked ordinary. A couch, a coffee table, Christmas decorations still in place. It struck me how strange it was that something so serious could unfold in such a familiar space. The second officer took out a notebook. "Mrs. Hill," he said gently, "I'm going to ask you to describe what happened in your own words." I took a deep breath and began again. I spoke slowly, choosing my words carefully. I described the stop, the questions, the tone, the physical contact. I made sure not to exaggerate. I didn't need to. The truth was heavy enough. As I spoke, I noticed the first officer shifting in his seat. His jaw tightened every time I mentioned something specific. When I finished, there was a brief silence. "Officer Reynolds," the second officer said, turning to his colleague. "Is that accurate?" Officer Reynolds hesitated. "I was conducting a routine stop," he said. "She matched a description." "What description?" my son asked calmly. Reynolds looked uncomfortable. "We had reports of suspicious activity." "In this neighborhood?" my son asked. "At 9 in the morning?" Reynolds cleared his throat. "Yes, sir." "Can you describe the suspect?" my son pressed. Reynolds paused too long. "Female. Middle-aged." My son leaned back slightly. "That's not a description," he said. "That's a category." The second officer wrote something down. "I didn't mean any disrespect," Reynolds said quickly. She became argumentative. "I asked why I was being stopped," I said. "That's not arguing." Reynolds looked at me, then away. "She refused consent to search." "And that gave you reason to grab her arm?" my son asked. Reynolds didn't answer. The room felt tight. I could hear the clock ticking again. Each second felt loud. The second officer closed his notebook. "Mrs. Hill," he said, "I'm formally documenting this as a complaint of misconduct." I felt a strange mix of relief and fear. "What happens now?" I asked. "This will be reviewed by Internal Affairs," he said. "There will be an investigation." Reynolds stiffened. My son nodded. "Good." Reynolds looked up sharply. "Sir, with respect," my son interrupted, his voice still calm. "My mother was humiliated and physically handled without cause. That deserves review." Reynolds fell silent. After a few more procedural questions, the officers stood to leave. The second officer turned to me at the door. "If you remember anything else, or if you feel unsafe, call this number directly." He handed me a card. Reynolds avoided looking at me as they left. When the door closed, the house felt quieter than before. My son stood for a moment, listening, then locked the door. I exhaled slowly. My legs felt weak again, and I sat down heavily on the couch. "I didn't want this," I said softly. "I know," my son replied. He sat beside me, his tone gentler now. "But sometimes wanting peace means confronting what breaks it." I looked at him. "Do you think anything will actually change?" He didn't answer right away. "I think it depends on how far they're willing to go, and how far we are." That night, sleep did not come easily. Every sound outside made me tense. I kept seeing the officer's face in my mind, hearing his voice. My son slept in the guest room, but I knew he was awake too. I could sense it. The next morning, I woke to sunlight filtering through the curtains. For a brief moment, everything felt normal again. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I stared at it, my stomach tightening. Then I answered. "Mrs. Hill," a woman's voice said. "This is Captain Elaine Morris from Internal Affairs. I'm calling regarding a complaint filed yesterday." My heart began to pound. "Yes," I said. "We'd like to speak with you in person," she continued. "As soon as possible." I agreed, my voice barely steady. When I hung up, I sat in silence for a long moment. Then I walked to the kitchen, where my son was making coffee. "They called," I said. He looked at me closely. "Internal Affairs?" I nodded. He set the mug down. "I'll go with you." I shook my head. "No. I need to do this myself." He studied my face, then nodded slowly. "All right, but I'll be nearby." As I put on my coat again, I felt the same fear as the day before. But something else was there now too. A quiet resolve. I wasn't just walking out of my house anymore. I was stepping into a fight I never asked for, but one I could no longer avoid. The building that housed Internal Affairs looked nothing like I had imagined. I expected something cold and intimidating, full of metal detectors and harsh lighting. Instead, it was quiet and almost ordinary, tucked between two office blocks downtown. Still, my hands tightened around my purse strap as I walked toward the entrance. Ordinary places can still hold difficult truths. My son parked across the street and stayed in the car, just like we had agreed. He didn't argue when I told him I needed to walk in alone. He only said he would be right there if I needed him. Knowing that made each step a little easier. Inside, a woman at the front desk greeted me politely and asked me to take a seat. The waiting area smelled faintly of coffee and paper. A few minutes passed. Then a door opened, and a tall woman with gray-streaked hair stepped out. "Mrs. Hill," she said. I stood. "Yes." "I'm Captain Morris," she said, extending her hand. Her grip was firm but respectful. "Thank you for coming in." Her office was simple. Desk, 2 chairs, a framed certificate on the wall. She gestured for me to sit. "I want you to know," she began, "that our conversation is confidential. My role is to understand exactly what happened." I nodded. "I understand." She asked me to tell the story again, from the beginning. I spoke slowly, carefully, describing each detail as clearly as I could. This time, I didn't rush. I didn't soften anything. I described how small I had felt, how powerless, how humiliating it was to be treated like a suspect in my own neighborhood. Captain Morris listened without interrupting. She took notes, but her eyes never left me for long. When I finished, she leaned back slightly. "Mrs. Hill," she said, "based on what you've described, there are several serious concerns." My chest tightened. "What does that mean?" "It means Officer Reynolds may have violated department policy," she said, "and possibly your civil rights." The words felt heavy, real. I nodded slowly. "There's one more thing," she continued. "You mentioned a neighbor witnessed part of the incident." "Yes," I said. "Linda. She lives next door." "We'll be contacting her," Captain Morris said, "as well as reviewing body camera footage." I froze. He was wearing a body camera? Captain Morris nodded. "All patrol officers are required to." A strange wave of relief washed over me. "So it's recorded?" "Yes," she said. "And if events occurred as you described, the footage will support that." When the interview ended, she walked me to the door. "This process takes time," she said. "But I want you to know your complaint is being taken seriously." Outside, the air felt colder than before. I stood for a moment, breathing deeply. Then I crossed the street to my son's car. He stepped out as soon as he saw me. How did it go? I told him everything as we drove home. He listened quietly, nodding occasionally. They'll check the footage, I said. They'll talk to Linda. That's good, he said. Truth holds up when it's recorded. That evening, word spread faster than I expected. Linda came by again, this time more determined. They talked to me, she said. I told them everything. I thanked her, meaning it more deeply than words could show. Over the next few days, my phone rang often. Calls from investigators. Follow-up questions. Each conversation stirred the memories again, but each time, I felt a little stronger answering. Then, one afternoon, my son received a call. He stepped into the hallway to take it. When he returned, his expression was serious. That officer has been placed on administrative leave, he said. I sat down slowly. Already. They reviewed the body cam footage, he continued. It wasn't good. I closed my eyes. Not from satisfaction. From exhaustion. They want to meet with you again, he added. And they've asked if I'm willing to attend. I looked at him. As my son. And as someone who understands the system, he said. I nodded. All right. The next meeting felt different. There were more people in the room. A legal advisor. Another supervisor. The tone was formal, careful. They showed me clips from the body camera. Watching it was harder than I expected. Seeing myself on the screen, smaller, quieter, being talked over, and handled so casually, made my stomach twist. That's enough, I said finally. They turned the screen off. We acknowledge this conduct was inappropriate, one of them said, and it does not reflect our standards. I had heard statements like that on the news before. They always sounded empty. This time, they were directed at me. What happens to him? I asked. There will be disciplinary action, they said. Possibly termination. Possibly. The word lingered. When we left, my son walked beside me silently. Outside, he stopped and turned to me. You did something important, he said. I didn't mean to, I replied. I just wanted groceries. He nodded. That's usually how change starts. That night, as I sat alone in the living room, I realized something. I was no longer just reacting. I was being heard. But I also knew this wasn't over. Not yet. The following days felt like living in a strange balance between fear and relief. Every time I stepped outside, I half expected to see Officer Reynolds' car parked at the curb or his shadow following me down the street. But nothing happened. The neighborhood was quiet. The sun rose and set as usual. And yet, the weight of what had happened lingered in my chest, like a stone I couldn't put down. My son stayed nearby, but didn't hover. He gave me space, letting me regain control of my own life while remaining ready to step in if anything escalated. We spent long afternoons talking about everything that had happened. Not just the incident with the officer, but our lives, our fears, the past struggles, and the principles he had lived by to get where he was. Listening to him, I understood more than ever why he had become a man of such discipline, strength, and integrity. The investigation moved slowly, but I began to feel a sense of empowerment that surprised me. I found myself recalling every detail of that morning with clarity. At first, it was just to make sure I remembered correctly. Then, I realized that by remembering, by telling the truth repeatedly, I was reclaiming my sense of dignity. No one could erase my experience if I could name it clearly, and I could. One evening, as the sun set behind the trees lining our street, my son and I sat on the porch with mugs of coffee. The neighborhood was quiet, children long gone inside their homes, leaving only the sound of distant traffic and the occasional barking dog. He didn't speak at first, just stared out at the street. The lines of his face softened in the amber light. I hate that you had to go through that, he said quietly. His voice carried the weight of someone who had seen far worse, yet still felt the sting of injustice personally. You shouldn't have been scared. You shouldn't have been humiliated. I shook my head. I know, Daniel. But fear doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. He looked at me, his eyes sharp but filled with care. Being human is different from being powerless, Mom. And today, you're not powerless anymore. The words settled in my chest like a warm weight. I realized he was right. The process wasn't over. Officer Reynolds' career might still hang in the balance. The department might still try to minimize what had happened. But the fact that I had spoken up, that my son had supported me, that truth and documentation now existed, gave me a power I hadn't felt in years. The next morning, a letter arrived. The envelope was plain, marked only with the department's insignia. I held it in my hands for a long moment before opening it. Inside, a single sheet of paper explained that Officer Reynolds had been suspended pending further review. There was also a brief note encouraging me to contact the department if I had any additional concerns. Reading those words, a strange mix of relief and disbelief washed over me. My hands shook slightly as I placed the letter on the kitchen table. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt validated. For once, someone in a position of authority acknowledged that what had happened was wrong and that action was being taken. Over the next week, I noticed subtle changes in the neighborhood. My neighbors who had previously been quiet or distant now greeted me warmly. Some offered kind words when they saw me outside, acknowledging what they had heard about the incident. Even small gestures like a nod or a smile from someone who had avoided me before felt significant. It was during one of these walks that I realized the full impact of my son's presence in my life. He didn't just protect me. He reminded me that I was not invisible, that I had value, and that injustice could be confronted without surrendering one's dignity. Watching him navigate the world with calm authority, I understood that my role as a mother had prepared me for this in ways I hadn't imagined. I had taught him resilience, and now he was teaching me courage in return. One evening, as Christmas lights still flickered softly across the living room, my son and I sat quietly together. We didn't speak for long, only letting the warmth of the house fill the silence. I thought about how quickly life could turn ordinary mornings into moments that test every fiber of your being. The fear, the humiliation, the helplessness, all of it was part of my story now. But so was the support, the protection, and the eventual acknowledgement of the truth. By the end of that week, I felt a shift in myself. The tight knot of fear and anxiety that had lodged in my chest began to loosen. I could walk down the street without flinching at the sound of a car. I could make eye contact with neighbors without feeling small. And most importantly, I could look at myself in the mirror and recognize my own strength. My son noticed the change too. One evening, he reached across the table and squeezed my hand gently. "You've done well," he said. "Not everyone stands up, even when it's just for themselves." "I couldn't have done it without you," I admitted. "You would have," he said, a hint of a smile breaking through his usual calm expression. "But I'm glad I was here." The days that followed carried their own quiet victories. Each phone call, each new piece of information from the investigation, reaffirmed that I was being heard. And as time passed, the weight of that morning began to lose its hold over me. It didn't disappear, but it became part of a larger narrative, a story of resilience, of family, and of the quiet power that comes from standing your ground. For the first time since the incident, I allowed myself to breathe fully. I allowed myself to hope that perhaps, just perhaps, change was possible, that authority could be held accountable, that injustice could be addressed without fear of retaliation. And in that hope, I found a small, steady peace. The days stretched on, each one carrying a rhythm that felt both ordinary and charged with anticipation. I continued my routines, grocery runs, morning tea, checking the mail, yet every step I took was grounded in a new awareness. I was no longer just a mother navigating her own life. I was someone who had stood up to authority and survived the confrontation. The realization was empowering, but also exhausting. One morning, my son suggested we go for a walk together. The neighborhood was quiet, the streets lined with frost-kissed trees. He walked beside me, his presence calm, but alert, the kind of quiet strength I had always admired. As we strolled, we talked about things I hadn't considered before, how power could be wielded unjustly, how fear could silence people, and how standing up for yourself, even in small ways, mattered. "Mom," he said quietly, "you have to understand something. What you experienced could happen to anyone. But most people don't have someone nearby who can protect them, who knows how to navigate the system. I looked at him, feeling the weight of both gratitude and guilt. I know, I said. I'm lucky. You're not just lucky, he replied. You're brave. And bravery has a ripple effect. By standing up, you're showing others they don't have to remain silent. His words lingered with me long after we returned home. I thought about Linda, my neighbor, who had found her courage to witness and speak. I thought about myself, trembling yet persistent. I thought about how easily injustice could go unnoticed, how many others might endure similar humiliation without anyone to advocate for them. Later that afternoon, my phone rang. It was the Internal Affairs office. They wanted an update on the witness statements and to schedule a formal meeting with Officer Reynolds and his superiors. I felt a mix of anxiety and resolve. My son stayed by my side as I prepared, helping me organize the timeline, the facts, and my own recollections. When we arrived, the room felt tense but professional. The officers present were polite, almost excessively so, and the presence of my son clearly shifted the atmosphere. Reynolds sat across from us, silent, his expression unreadable. Watching him sit there, I felt a strange mixture of emotions: fear, relief, anger, and the beginnings of closure. The meeting began with formalities, followed by the presentation of evidence, body camera footage, witness accounts, and statements. I watched as the truth unfolded in a way I had only feared in my imagination. Reynolds had no words to refute the footage. The clarity of it was undeniable. He flinched slightly when my own actions and reactions were replayed. Not out of guilt, I realized, but because the presence of my son transformed what had been a simple complaint into a situation he could no longer ignore or minimize. Captain Morris leaned forward, her expression firm. "Officer Reynolds," she said, "your actions this morning violated departmental policy and, more importantly, caused emotional and physical harm to Mrs. Hill. We are recommending disciplinary action, up to and including termination." Reynolds shifted uncomfortably, his eyes flicking to my son, who simply observed in silence. The room seemed to hold its breath. Then, after what felt like a long pause, the department representative spoke about steps for restitution, counseling, and formal acknowledgement of misconduct. For me, the experience was surreal. Watching the officer confronted with undeniable evidence and hearing the commitment to accountability stirred a mix of relief and exhaustion. I realized I had been carrying this weight far longer than necessary. But now, for the first time, I felt a sense of real closure taking shape. After the meeting, my son and I walked outside. The sun had dipped lower, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. The air felt crisp, almost cleansing. We didn't speak at first, only letting the quiet of the evening fill the space between us. Finally, he broke the silence. "Mom, you did everything right. You told the truth. You stayed calm. You didn't let fear dictate your actions. That's why it worked." I nodded slowly, the reality settling in. "I couldn't have done it without you," I said. He shook his head gently. "No, you could have. But I'm glad I was here." Walking home, I felt lighter. The tension that had gripped me for days seemed to loosen slightly with every step. I knew that life wouldn't suddenly be free of challenges or fears, but the knowledge that I had faced injustice, and that the system, imperfect as it is, could acknowledge it, brought a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. That night, as we sat together in the living room, the Christmas lights flickering softly around us, I allowed myself to reflect. I thought about the morning when my dignity had been challenged, the humiliation that had weighed so heavily on my shoulders. And I thought about how that moment, difficult as it was, had revealed something deeper. The resilience within me, the protective power of family, and the quiet strength that comes from speaking truth to authority. I realized that this story, while personal, was not unique. So many women, so many people, face similar violations of trust, respect, and authority. And yet, the courage to stand up, even in small ways, can ripple outward in ways we might never fully see. I sat back and took a deep breath, letting the warmth of the house and the presence of my son fill the space around me. The morning had been dark, heavy, and frightening. But now in the quiet evening, I understood that resilience and justice could coexist, and that sometimes the smallest actions, speaking up, telling the truth, and refusing to be invisible, can change everything. I knew that the days ahead would not be without their challenges. There would still be reminders of that morning, still moments when I would have to face fear or uncertainty. But for the first time since it happened, I believed I could face them, not as a frightened woman, but as someone who had survived, who had been heard, and who had stood her ground. And for me, that was everything. The weeks that followed were quiet, yet they were alive with change. Officer Reynolds had been formally disciplined, his suspension official, and the department had issued a statement acknowledging the misconduct and promising corrective measures. I received confirmation letters, emails, and phone calls, each one a reminder that what had seemed like an ordinary morning had transformed into something far greater. I had been seen, heard, and validated, and the ripple effects extended far beyond my own experience. Life returned to routines that felt comforting after the chaos. Morning tea, grocery runs, phone calls with neighbors, and quiet evenings in the living room with my son. Yet, everything felt subtly altered. I noticed glances from neighbors filled with respect, small gestures of kindness, and even officers, in passing, nodding politely. The world hadn't changed completely, but my place in it had. I walked with a steadiness I hadn't known I possessed. Fear no longer dominated my thoughts. One evening, my son and I sat by the window, the neighborhood bathed in the soft glow of lingering Christmas lights. Silence stretched between us, not awkward, but reflective. He broke it gently. "Mom," he said, "what happened that morning, it was wrong. But your response, the way you stood your ground, it mattered. And it will continue to matter, in ways you might not even see yet." I smiled faintly, a mixture of exhaustion and relief. I never expected it to go this far. I just wanted groceries. I didn't want trouble. I didn't want humiliation. "You couldn't control what he chose to do," he said, "but you controlled how you responded. And that made all the difference." I thought back to the moment he had arrived at the house that morning. The fear, the humiliation, the helplessness. I could still feel the echo of it in my chest. And yet, seeing him then, seeing him as both my son and a man of authority, had shifted everything. His presence had turned despair into action, vulnerability into courage. The next day, I visited the park where I had once walked freely, now with a sense of vigilance. My steps were measured but confident. I saw children playing, neighbors chatting, and the sun casting its late afternoon warmth across the paths. In that ordinary scene, I felt extraordinary. The world felt smaller in a way that made it navigable. The fear had not disappeared entirely, but it had been tempered with awareness and strength. Later that afternoon, my son joined me on a short walk. He didn't need to say much. His presence alone was enough. But after a while, he spoke. "Mom, people think courage is always loud and heroic. Sometimes it's quiet, standing your ground, telling the truth, protecting yourself and others. What you did, that's real courage." I looked at him, feeling a swell of pride and gratitude I could barely articulate. "I only did what I had to do," I said. "And you did it well," he replied. "Better than well." The remainder of the week passed in a blend of ordinary tasks and subtle victories. I started walking to the store again on my own, feeling a sense of confidence I had not felt before. Even the sight of a patrol car on the street no longer caused my chest to tighten. I had learned that power does not always come from force. It comes from truth, preparation, and the courage to stand firm when it matters most. One evening, as I prepared tea, I reflected on the journey that began with a simple walk after Christmas. What could have been a story of humiliation and helplessness had transformed into a story of resilience, accountability, and family. I realized that courage was not about grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. It was about maintaining integrity in small, persistent ways, even when the world seemed indifferent or hostile. My son, sitting quietly across from me, smiled. "You've changed something, Mom. Not just for yourself, but for everyone who sees this story, who hears it, or who witnesses your strength. It matters more than you know." I nodded. He was right. The incident had started with fear and injustice, but it had ended with recognition, courage, and dignity. My son's arrival had been pivotal, but it was not the only reason for the outcome. My persistence, my refusal to shrink in the face of authority, and my willingness to speak truth had shaped the ending just as much. That night, as the lights in the house flickered softly and the neighborhood lay quiet under a winter sky, I felt a peace I hadn't imagined possible. The morning after Christmas, the fear, the humiliation, the injustice, they were memories now, no longer defining moments. Instead, they were reminders of resilience, of standing firm, and of the quiet power that comes from being seen, heard, and supported. I knew life would continue to bring challenges, moments of fear, and times when I might feel small again. But I also knew that I had discovered something enduring, the strength within myself, the protective power of my family, and the truth that courage, even quiet, patient courage, can change everything. As I looked at my son, then around the living room at the lingering Christmas lights, I realized that moment of fear had become a turning point. A point where dignity, truth, and love intersected. And in that intersection, I found my strength. The story that began with humiliation and helplessness had ended in acknowledgement, justice, and resilience. And for the first time in a long while, I felt the profound satisfaction of knowing that I had faced fear, endured it, and emerged stronger than before.